A very, very good evening, a warm welcome to a rather chilly Johannesburg. And welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, brought to you by Norman Goodfellows. I think it's about 3 degrees outside. You know it's got to proper winter in Johannesburg when it's the first day in which you've sellotaped your puppy to your feet to try and keep them warm as the cold kicks in. It's really odd weather. Rain, thunderstorms in June and winter in Johannesburg. Global warming, climate change. There are better qualified people than me to talk about such things. And in fact, we've got some people coming up on the show next week, I think, talking about some different elements of sustainable wine farming and how we produce the wine that we love to drink. So look out for that coming up in the next week or so. Look out today, though, for a slightly bittersweet show as we remember very fondly and with great admiration 2 members of the winemaking community are sadly no longer with us. Martin Moore, it was more than just a winemaker. He was a champion of the industry, a great friend and mentor to so many, as we'll hear on the show this evening. He also had an extraordinary capacity for conversation. You didn't have a short chat with Martin Moore, as you might have seen if you saw him on the show, as I certainly saw on the few times that I got to hang out with him. And I cherish the memories of those times because, yes, they were lengthy conversations, but they were most entertaining ones. And they were ones I always learnt an enormous amount of. And throughout the wine industry, we see so many people who are more than happy to give of their time and their knowledge to other people and share what they've learnt about wine. Martin embodied that particularly, and today, with a couple of his former colleagues, we'll be paying tribute to him, as we will to a slightly lesser known, I suspect, member of the wine industry, not a winemaker in this case, but a viticulturist and somebody who supplied grapes to some of South Africa's most iconic wine for people like Chris Alheit, people like Ibn Sadi, and people like Mark van Buren at Antoni Rupert. And you might have seen that Basie's name was on a particular wine of theirs. So we'll explore his legacy as well and find out why both Martin Moore and Basie van Lill were such important parts of the South African wine landscape. That's to come in just a moment as we raise 2 large glasses to 2 wonderful men with some dear friends of theirs. First of all, though, here's a quick update on some wine news. All right, this is coming up at Murati on the 1st of July. You can head over to the website to find out a bit more about it. Celebrating Portuguese and fortified styles, which is a good way of talking about port. An area which was, I think it was Patson Matonsi at the Investec Trophy Show was talking about this in feedback about how we make such good dessert and fortified and port-style wine, and we just don't drink enough of it. We don't celebrate it enough, and this is Murati attempting to steer us in the right direction. And what a time to do it. Middle of the Cape winter, cold and wet, as it quite often is. A perfect antidote to head over to the Murati website for a bit more information on the chance to celebrate a style of wine that we really do so well in South Africa. Then this is coming up on the 27th of June, a Zevenwacht wine tasting at Norman Goodfellows in Fourways. I'll be there with the Zevenwacht team. They're making some terrific wine at the moment. We will be featuring a number of the wines they have and doing so in partnership with some lovely food. That's been a new addition to these tastings, pairing each wine with some terrific food. To get in, it's a small contribution to charity, and you get far more value than what you pay for it. Chance to meet the winemaker. I'll be there as well, talking through the evening. Some lovely food, most importantly, some really, really good wine from Zevenwacht. So definitely one worth coming along to if you're in the Johannesburg area, Tuesday, the 27th of June. All right, and also one happening tomorrow, your last chance to come along. Tomorrow and Wednesday night, 2 events to look out for tomorrow. We're tasting with Kevin Arnold and his family wines, and that's also down at Norman Goodfellows in Fourways. And then Wednesday night, we will be at the Old Oak at Royal Johannesburg, where we will be having a wine dinner. Last few seats available for that. I'll be joining Kevin Arnold himself, and not just drinking wine and eating the food of Chef Ransley Peterson, but also telling some of the stories of Kevin's extraordinary life in wine, the career he's had, the places he's been, going back to Delheim and Rustenfried and the early days of one of the Cape's great winemakers, get in touch with either Dan Really Likes Wine or the team at Royal Johannesburg to come along and join us. Last few seats available for Wednesday night. All right, well, Kevin Arnold is one of the greats. So too are both of the guests we celebrate. They're here in spirit with us on the show this evening, and to channel that spirit into some wonderful memories and explain just why they contributed so much to South African wine are two of Martin's colleagues at Durbanville Hills. Albert and Jenna join us, who worked with and learned so much from Martin Moore, and Mark van Buren is also with us from Antoni Rupert. We're hoping Ibn Sadi might drop in by the end of the show, but until that happens, we've got three very worthy guests to remember, two very special people. So Albert, Jenna, Mark, welcome. Lovely to have you on the show. Thanks for being part of Dan Really Likes Wine, and part of a show which it's certainly got some sadness to it, because I know all three of you will be dearly missing two very, very important members of the South African wine community. But I think that that's somewhat offset by the sheer scale of the legacy that they left and the impact they had in what were two very full lives as members of the wine community. Before we chat about that legacy and the impact they had, though, Albert, if you could just kick us off with a sketch. Who was Martin Moore? Who was the man you knew? And what, for you, was what made him such a special part of our wine community?
Yeah, Dan, thank you. Nice being here. And just also to Basie and the team, our condolences. Martin, how do you describe the man? A large, big personality, full of confidence. I think you referred to him, Dan, that very difficult to stop him. So even when it was a Jenna wine tasting, or Kobus Gerber's wine tasting, or Wilhelm Coetzee wine tasting, Martin inevitably would have ended up taking over and just didn't stick with the program. You couldn't put him in a box. But a big man with a very small heart, a passion for the grape suppliers, the grape growers, a man that understands that he couldn't make great wine if it didn't happen out there in the vineyards. And I learned so much from him in terms of you just don't fix an area or a vineyard in 1 or 2 years. It takes time, and it also takes that passion and dedication to get it right and to learn your specific area. That he always referred to the viticulturists from the warm areas and the cold areas, and how all the textbooks were written for the warm areas. So we had lots of fun and debate about it. But the man, what he's done through his career at KWV, later at Groot Constantia, ended up at Durbanville Hills, man that served on many tasting panels, a man that I hardly seen him without a glass of Sauvignon Blanc somewhere within reach, because that was his absolute passion. And I think that a storyteller, influence, a person that could just get on with everyone that crossed his path. So then, that's the print he left on me.
I think you've summed up such an important part of what I took from Martin from the relatively little time I spent, was that willingness to engage with people. He did seem to get on so famously. Do you remember the very first time you met Martin and the impression that he had on you?
Yeah, I actually was not at Durbanville Hills at that stage. I was part of a team that had Durbanville Hills didn't exist in 1998. So when the whole joint venture idea was born, we need to find a winemaker and we need to find one of the best. So I was on the selection team, and it ended up in the last two candidates, and that's where I had, and it was typically one of those chirps and say, I don't know how. I was in Dagbreek Race, he was in Eendracht at Stellenbosch, so he said, well, there's no way that a panel consisting of someone on the Dagbreek panel, or someone from the Dagbreek panel being on someone from Dagbreek Race being on the selection panel, and you won't make a good selection. That was sort of the chirp that he gave me. And then I discovered that the second guy on the final candidate list was someone that I know very well. So I actually withdraw. And he still chirped me about it. He said, it's because I told you you're not good enough to be on the panel. Yeah, that was mine.
There was always a playfulness, always a joy to everything he seemed to do. Would that be an accurate reflection, Jenna, for the Martin that you knew at Durbanville Hills, the man who taught you so much, that he was always full of that kind of light and life, and was just a happy kind of guy?
Definitely. I think one of the things I'll remember the most about him is every time he meets, or every time he introduced me to somebody that I'd met for the first time, he'd warn them that I don't have an off switch and that I was worse than a generator with the amount of talking. And it was always quite funny because when Martin and I are in the same room together, it almost becomes a competition to see who can get the most words in. But his sense of humor will be greatly remembered. There was a week where he came into the office every day with a Mexican word of the day, and it turned into a punny joke. And one day I wasn't at work, and he sent me a message at 20 to 8 that evening with a picture of the Mexican word of the day, and he said, "You thought you could get away from me, but you were wrong."
When you start off in the wine industry, it can be an intimidating place to be. There's so much to do and a lot of pressure often as a young winemaker. How important was it to have somebody like Martin to settle you down early on in your career and to give you the kind of guidance that I'm sure you did?
I think it's incredibly important to have a mentor like Martin. And one thing Martin taught me that will always sit with me, and one thing he stressed, is authenticity. Don't try and be someone else to impress people or to keep everybody else happy. Be exactly who you are, as he always was. He was always himself, no matter who the crowd was. Martin was Martin. And yeah, it's as a young winemaker, if you don't have that kind of a mentor in your life, I'd urge you to go and seek out a mentor like that, because it makes a world of difference feeling comfortable enough to walk into somebody's office with a list of questions and know that they're going to make time for you and that they're going to answer the question in earnest. And I think that was one thing Martin was really, really good at. He never said, "No, I don't have time." He would always, and if he was busy, he would say, "Come back just now." And if I asked him the questions, he always had a list of answers. That man had a library of knowledge in his office as well, and journals and journals and journals. He wrote everything down. So no matter what my question, I can guarantee you, he always had the correct answer.
It would be easy, I think, to just characterize him as this wonderful, friendly, supportive, terrific kind of guy, and that's clearly what he was. But you don't want to forget that other element, which was so important, which you will have seen so much of, Jenna, which was that he was also a supremely gifted winemaker.
He was, and he was incredibly involved in the vineyard, and I firmly believe, especially after having had the privilege of having Martin as a mentor over the last 2 years, that you cannot be a good winemaker if you don't know what's going on in your vineyard. And Martin really does that harmony between viticulture and enology, between the farming and the winemaking, is actually truly the secret to making a really amazing wine, is understanding your grapes, understanding your vineyard, understanding the people that you're working with, and pulling that all into your winemaking. It's not just about the grapes and the yeast. It's about the people that you work with as well.
It is indeed. I think that was probably quite central to the philosophy of the other very special member of the South African wine family who we raise a glass to today. Let's head over to Mark van Beeren and Tony Rupert Weiner, who works out on the Swartland side of things, and that meant spending a lot of time engaging with Basie van Lill, somebody I expect a lot of people won't know terribly well, if at all, Mark, which is probably how he would have liked it from what I gather, because I never had the chance to meet him, but he always seemed to be a fairly low-key blue-collar sort, but somebody who created some quite outstanding grapes for many of our top winemakers to use. Give us a portrait of this quiet giant of South African wine.
Hi, thanks, Dan. Absolutely. I think Basie van Lill, not many people would have known him or had the privilege of actually meeting him, but he was an absolutely incredible human being. I'll never forget the first time I met him in 2014. It's one of those people you can really, that phrase, the salt of the earth kind of people. He was a man of the soil, a man of the earth, and farming up in Citrusdale is not a very easy place to be farming. And it's, I think when you meet them, Basie and his family, Rita and Christian's son, for the first time, you immediately get a sense of the warmth of those people. They are so genuine, just beautiful people to engage with and to meet, and people that once you have met them, you know you've met someone genuine and real. So beautiful people to have gotten to know over the years, and it's been a privilege. Yeah, we will miss him dearly.
Winemakers tend to get a lot of the credit, and you certainly do deserve plenty of credit. But there's guys out in the fields, the viticulturists, the farmers, who play such an important part, and one that I don't think gets quite as much credit as it should. Basie is exactly in that category. But what was it about him as a farmer that set him apart, that allowed him to create the kind of grapes that so many of you top winemakers would scramble to get your hands on?
Well, I think, Dan, it was for them. It was a lifestyle. It was their way of life up there, and of course, they would have other farming aspects going up there in that region. Of course, it's well known for rooibos tea and sheep farming, but just the extremities of where these old vines were planted. Back in the 70s, 80s, and even further back, 60s and 50s. In some cases, these are vineyards that have been around there for many, many years, all unirrigated vineyards, as you can see on the picture there. These old vines, in many ways, I think he had it was just running through his blood. This was his passion. This was something that he lived for. So it wasn't just a job for him. It was his whole lifestyle. His whole entire family was centered around farming there. And I think that's something you can't really explain or replace. It's something that just is in his being. When you look at the lines on Basie's face, you can tell it's a man who's been under the sun for many, many hours. And I'll never forget his little brown hat that you could see. That wasn't bought yesterday. That's been coming for a number of years now. So just somebody who's authentic, who has lived a very simplistic lifestyle. This is just part of their day-to-day living that they made, that they had such an incredible passion for, and of course generations. So they've been through some tough years, some years easier than other, but this is what they do for decades, and it's very special.
I think there's an apt analogy to be made with the old vines that we have in South Africa and that we increasingly grow to cherish, where with the time, the experience that these vines have, the fruit that they give us becomes quite extraordinary. And in a sense, that's what we lose with Basie, that after so many years, his understanding of the vines that he oversaw, the grapes that he was able to pass on to winemakers, had just become more and more intimate. And so what I'm sure he was delivering with every passing vintage was even more welcomed by you guys who then had the comparatively simple job of turning into more amazing wine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I must say, it's wonderful to be, his son Christian has also taken over the farm there in recent years. Basie's health wasn't great. Christians, you can see the same thread. In Afrikaans, they say, die appel val nie ver van die boom af nie. And you can see that same thread of family and values and respect for nature and your environment. It all runs through Christian, and I'm convinced it's pretty evident that he's going to continue the legacy that his father's left him. There's just so much, I think, warmth and respect for what they're doing. That I think, you say it's simple to make the wines from there. It's a lot of pressure, I suppose, to reflect the amazing quality of terroir that we are able to work with there. And these vineyards are very, very unique. It's obviously small yielding, low volumes that you get one shot at every year to work with. But just, I think, that environment of the Skirchberg and the grapes that have been recognized in the last sort of 10 to 15 years has really put a major spotlight on our wine industry. If you think of what Eben and Chris have done, just to highlight the amazing quality of especially Chenin Blanc up in that area. It's really been a revolutionary change and focus on high-end wines from this country. So we have a lot to be thankful for what's being done up there. Of course, a lot of the work that Rosa Krier has done in the early years and still continuing to do in the Skirchberg must be mentioned, because she's put incredibly hard work and long hours and dedication into just highlighting this region and these growers. I know for her it's always been a great focus on just the vineyards and the growers that are behind all these wines. But well, hopefully by producing some of these wines, we can honor them with some good quality stuff in the bottle.
I'll come back to Mark for a little more specifics on the wine that Basie's helped Mark and his team to produce. Let's jump back to Durbanville Hills, though, and back to Jenna. Jenna, in terms of the learnings that you took from Martin, what do you think was the most important of all the lessons that he's left behind for you personally?
I think, as I mentioned earlier, to be authentic, to be who you are, not to put on a show, not to be over-prepared, not to make it sound like you've rehearsed an essay when you do a tasting, but to rather speak from your passion and your knowledge. I think that was the most important thing that he taught me. He always spoke with this great amount of passion and love, and if he cracked a joke and nobody laughed, he would laugh at his own joke. He was authentic to who he was. He was authentic to his sense of humor. He had this massive personality that just couldn't be contained. And you know what? He didn't suppress it or contain it for everybody. He was proud of who he was. He was proud of his wines. No matter what, he taught me, you stay loyal to your brand. If I go to a restaurant and they don't have Durbanville Hills on the menu, Martin would have definitely called the manager over and said, you need to get D Hills on your menu now.
And what about the winemaking side of things? We've touched on the fact that he was such a quality winemaker, but what were the lessons for you as a winemaker that you learned? What did he help you to understand about getting the best out of yourself as a winemaker?
Martin definitely taught me that the secret to winemaking lies in taste. There's no set recipe. You obviously have to produce a wine that your customers want, but we have a boutique cellar inside the cellar as well. And Martin was so good at tasting out the different wines that he could taste out the different producers. Even if they were in a big tank, he would be able to tell you which 2 or 3 vineyard blocks went into that tank and where they came from and on what day they were harvested. So I think he was incredibly on top of it as far as that goes. And I'm still trying. It's very difficult because my palate is not as experienced as his was. But I think with tasting, it's not just tasting the wine, it's tasting the grapes as well, and realizing that, an analysis might tell you one story, but your taste buds are going to tell you a completely different story, and to be true to your gut and your instinct, and to taste through everything before you make a decision.
I'm going to ask you a little later on the show, so I'll give you some time to think about it, which particular wine you would think Martin would most want us to raise a glass of in his direction. But what, from the time that you spent with him, generally was the kind of wine that got him most excited as a winemaker?
I think the whole of South Africa knows the answer to that question. It's Sauvignon Blanc. Martin lived, breathed, and drank Sauvignon Blanc. I'm sure that if they had to test his blood group, it wouldn't be A or B, it would be Sauvignon Blanc.
Albert, I don't think you'll be arguing with that. There was a passion. I remember you and I having a conversation with Martin over lunch, drinking Chenin Blanc, and there were definitely 1 or 2 Sauvignons quietly slipped in along the way. It was a grape that he'd found a spiritual kinship with.
No, absolutely, and I think one of the most beautiful traits of Martin was that it wasn't necessarily the Cape Mist Reserve range. It wasn't the Tangram that's a dominant Sauvignon Blanc. It was the Durbanville Hills, the wine that gives you consistency, that gives you reliability, that's accessible to wine lovers out there, that they can enjoy, whether it's with their girlfriend or at the braai or after the Western Province beat the Sharks. But that was, if we had to make a choice, we often on a Friday afternoon had a drink together just before we say goodbye for the weekend. And if someone wanted something of the reserve wines, Martin would say, that's fine, but I'm having my Durbanville Hills Sauvignon Blanc. That's who he was.
And I think that in turn played a really big role, Albert, in putting Durbanville on the map. Not just Durbanville Hills, but Durbanville as a whole, as real champion Sauvignon Blanc terroir, and not just in a South African context, but I think globally people recognize the Durbanville area as the home of world-class Sauvignon Blanc. How much of an impact do you think Martin had in shaping that story and shaping that understanding of Durbanville as a natural home for his favorite grape?
Then I got a phone call from Bernard Weller from Natida last week. He was the chairman of the Durbanville Wine Valley Association, where we're 13 wineries working together. And he actually said that with me. He said, you know what, if it wasn't for Martin and if it wasn't for Durbanville Hills, the Durbanville area wouldn't have gotten the recognition that it actually got in the last couple of years. And for that, I think we salute him. He could have tried to do his own thing as the big seller there on the hill, but he always had time to give back to the bigger Durbanville area. I remember how there were schools. His two boys were quite close to him and good sportsmen, and I remember how other schools tried to lure them to their side. And he just said, no, I'm born and bred Durbanville, and that's where my kids will go to school because that's where I make my livelihood from. And I think with what he's put out there and the stories he's telling and the terroir that he described so well for Durbanville, and it's amazing to see that we see the results. We see the rewards coming in terms of people visiting, in terms of wine writers' interest. So Martin, thank you for that one. I think everyone in the Durbanville working with grapes, working with wine brands from that area, from that wine of origin, owes you a big thank you. We salute you for that.
That's a wonderful part of his heritage. It's one he could lay claim to, Albert, because Durbanville is naturally suited to making Sauvignon Blanc. The combination of the terroir, that wonderful breeze, it's just a perfect place for Sauvignon Blanc. But the wine still had to be made, and it still had to be made well enough to get people's attention, to show the translation of the terroir and those conditions into the kind of wine that got people's heads turning and snapping to attention. What was it about his approach to Sauvignon Blanc, about his magic touch as a winemaker, that allowed that Sauvignon Blanc to come through as successfully as it did?
And I think it was his understanding of the vineyards, combined with the special skill of tasting that Jenna referred to. He always used the example of a Lego model. He said, Koos, if you farm on this farm and this specific block, and that block gives you a yellow Lego block, then you farm it according to this, that gives you the best Lego yellow block that you can get. Don't try and make it green or try and make it blue. And so he worked with every farm and every block. And for him, it was about bringing that complexity into the blend. He made sure that he had the different components from the different aspects and the different blocks. And that in the cellar with his winemaking team, they would have tasted the perfect reds and greens and blues and purples to put the perfect Lego model together. And that was his Sauvignon Blanc story. He believed in layers and complexity, going right from the thiol side on the more tropical flavors to the more greener side on the methoxypyrin side. And that was his skill, is to get it right in the vineyard, bring it into the cellar, and put it together in this beautiful end product.
It's a wonderful analogy, that Lego one, and I can almost hear Martin telling that story in his own wonderfully happy and engaging way. He was able to translate wines out of the vines of Durbanville. That's what so many winemakers have done from the grapes of Basie van Lill. Before we talk, Mark, about your specific wines, we've got some real rock stars, not just yourself, making wine with Basie's name to it. That Van Lill signature, which now continues through his son, Christian Alheit, Ibn Sadi. These are not people who just take any old grape and toss it into making wine. What from your conversations that we see Ibn there with Basie, what from your understanding of your fellow winemakers drew them to Basie and helped them to make the kind of wine that's sort of the 98 and 100 point stuff that we see from international critics?
Yeah, I think, Dan, there's a real specific regionality about the grapes growing in that region. Of course, it's dryland farmed old vines, so your yields are pretty low. Your growing season is, there's not a lot of water up there, so these vines are ripening pretty quickly when it comes to sort of end of January. Early February weeks. It's your window of opportunity to pick these grapes is fairly small, but I think it's probably the concentration of flavors that you can find up there with the beautiful acidity. Small bunches and small berries tend to give you those beautiful acidity levels that we look for in great wines. It's actually amazing when you're working with Chenin Blanc, which is what we do here in this cellar. Just we do whole bunch pressing with the Chenin, and when you compare the Chenin Blanc that's coming from Basie's farm to, say, our Chenin Blanc in Rebec's River, which is also in the Swartland area, there's an immediate difference in just the appearance of the juice. The juice coming up from Basie's farm, from Citrusdal, has almost got a more sort of a lighter green, milky, almost white appearance. And it doesn't tend to oxidize very quickly. And I'm not sure what the makeup is at making it so different, but if I compare it to Chenin Blancs from other regions, they tend to have a bit more of a brown tinge immediately at that early stage of coming out of the press. I think inherently there's something unique about that site, about that area, which is able to produce wines that have got amazing structure, and chemically have got a great analysis. And these are wines that you can age very well too, because of that chemical makeup. So I think inherently just the region where these grapes are grown is incredible to work with. You get beautiful, rich flavors. I always tend to find a little hint of herbaceousness coming through on the Chenin Blanc from there as well. But it's really unique. And I think also just getting to know the styles of what you can work with. I think initially in early years, I was probably trying to play around a bit more than I should have been. And I think these wines don't need new oak. They just need you need to step back and let these vineyards try and express themselves in the wines itself. It's great working with this, with the fruit from there.
You mentioned farm, and I get the sense that it was really a farm in the traditional sense. I think there's rooibos growing around, and it's a quite a rural feel to it. So sketch the picture of what to expect when you arrive to come and pay a visit to these vineyards.
I'll never forget it. It was 2014, my first trip up there with the winemaking team, and you kind of, you drive. It's about 250 kilometers from Franschhoek. So it's a pretty solid drive, leaving early in the morning and going up there, normally getting up there just after 8 in the morning or so. And it's kind of this arid landscape. You're climbing up to about 500 meters above sea level. Basie's vineyard there is about 60 kilometers from the ocean, from the Atlantic Ocean. But what's really interesting is when you're standing in that vineyard, you can feel the breeze. On a really hot day, you can actually feel the breeze coming up from the Atlantic, and that's cooling those vineyards down. I think that is one of the factors which is making this quite a special site. But it's essentially you're dealing with the sandy topsoil, this sort of red decomposed sandstone soils that go quite deep, and then underneath you've got this clay bank, which is obviously where the water retention is, and that's what's keeping these vineyards going in the dry seasons. But it's sort of arid bushland. It's not a very lush green area. It's red sand, small bushes, shrubs, and it's a lot of fynbos. It's quite beautiful. Almost looks like a bit of a lunar landscape, but with a bit more vegetation on it than that. But it's a really sort of serene area. I think there's not much industry going on around there. These farms are quite remote. The roads are often very very rugged, and of course logistically to get the grapes down from there, it takes a lot of teamwork. But yeah, it's there's nothing else around there in terms of vineyards. They really are very isolated pockets where these vineyards are growing. So it's pretty amazing. I'll never forget that the first time I went up there. It was like, wow, I can't believe these vineyards are actually surviving and growing out here. So it's dry land. I mean, their rainfall is like between 150 to 350 in a year, depending on the year. But it's a low rainfall area. And these old vines can tell a few stories about survival there, that's for sure.
And they're vines which are thankfully still part of our winemaking ecosystem, thanks to people like Basie and Rosa Clear and Andre van Rensburg and the Old Vine Project. And they allow you to produce smart wines, a particular category, a character under that Cape of Good Hope label. And I think it feeds in quite nicely what you guys have set out to do in terms of creating quite distinctive wines of origin that are dotted around some different and slightly off the beaten track corners of the wine map in South Africa, and the kind of space that Basie was overseeing, the kind of grapes that he's been able to supply you with.
Yeah, I think that's our Cape of Good Hope range is really highlighting these incredible stories, these vineyards that would have been forgotten or overlooked in the past, and that have been discovered and sort of I think highlighted now in our industry. That's makes up our Cape of Good Hope range, which from my perspective, that's where the magic is. I think it's definitely not commercial wines. These are wines with stories. These are wines that our aim as winemakers here is just to showcase the regionality of where these vineyards are growing. And to work with growers like Basie van Lill and Henk Lang, who sadly passed away last year, we've lost two legends of the industry. These are definitely special areas that we have the privilege of trying to showcase in our Cape of Good Hope range and bottle a sense of terroir, regionality, and authenticity in the wines we're trying to produce from there.
And indeed, so extending the proud legacy of two great wine characters. Albert, if we head back to Martin and that legacy that he's left behind from a wine perspective, was there a particular wine, particular couple of wines that over Martin's career he always looked back on with extra fondness and said, yeah, this one I got really right?
Yeah, I can call that one easily as well. His first Sauvignon Blanc that he made, 1999, first vintage at Durbanville Hills. It was called Basie Skraal. That was a top-end Sauvignon Blanc that the cellar launched with. And then that same wine in 2009, also the Basie Skraal. And sadly, it's a range that we don't make anymore. And maybe just something to think about is maybe to do a commemorative relive of Martin's favorite. It was that deep dust road grass Sauvignon Blancs that if you get it and you loved it. Not so popular in the general consumer's palate, but that would have been Martin's favorite one.
And if we were sitting down, and I can guess at this because I've had the opportunity to do so. If we were sitting down now with Martin and we were pouring a glass of that wine and looking back, what are the moments of your time with Martin, if we were reflecting together, that you would count as your fondest memories of the man?
Dan, I think it is the one that would describe him and that I will forever remember is last year when the news was out that Heineken is taking over the group. They'll be our new bosses, so the big bosses of Heineken, and I'm not talking only South Africa, I'm talking about the big groups, big bosses came out to Durbanville Hills. They had a conference. We haven't seen them, we just know that they were there. And during tea time, we saw one of the guys venturing into the cellar on the catwalk. And Martin went out to him and said, so what are you doing here? And the guy said, well, I'm just looking at this impressive cellar. I said, well, I don't know who you are, but you just don't walk into a winery. This is not a brewery. You ask permission to walk into a winery. And that guy is today the CEO of Heineken Beverages, so our big boss. So I just think that's Martin. He just had no filters. He was just, and the beauty of that is that evening at dinner, Geordie came and said, can I please sit next to that man? that's how he could interact with people. And he could tell stories about wine and food that he loved so much, and people around him. He always said, you don't pay food and wine, you pay people. And then you bring wine and food to make it better.
That sums up Martin so well. What about the legacy that Martin would like to be remembered for? We see the wine he made, the people like Jenna he taught, the friends like you that he was such a warm companion to. But as a member of the wine community, what do you think Martin would like to see as the legacy he left behind and the work continued in his name?
I think you would like everyone to understand that take care of your primary producers, make sure that they are part of the success and also share in terms of the end results. Make sure that they're sustainable. Make sure that everyone in the value chain of wine is sustainable. And goodness gracious, get the people out there in the other parts of the world to understand what beautiful wines we're selling way too cheap. So let's get the prices out there right and make sure that we can farm sustainably and run a sustainable business in the wine industry for South Africa.
A simple but very important and very uplifting set of principles that Martin held dear to him. Jenna, what about for you as you flick back through that book of memories? I'm sure you've done on numerous occasions over the last couple of weeks. What are one or two of those other Martin Moore moments that will always stay with you?
Sure, Dan. I don't want to start crying, but on the Friday before he passed away, we had a blending experience at work, and I actually had an appointment I needed to get to straight after work, and something in me just said to me, just sit and have this glass of wine with Martin, sit down and chat with him. And we spoke about all of the plans for the future and his role at Durbanville Hills and my role under his leadership and mentorship. And that was the afternoon that I found out that Martin is an in-the-closet rosé drinker. I ordered a glass of rosé to enjoy with him, and he had Sauvignon Blanc. And the tasting room assistants were mortified. They said to me, how on earth could you be drinking rosé? And Martin came up for me and said, hey, he's an in-the-closet rosé drinker. He drinks rosé at home too. And we sat for about 2.5 hours on that Friday afternoon, just talking about life, talking about how proud he is of his boys, talking about how amazing it was doing the blending experience and spending the afternoon together, talking about where the cellar's going to, how the winemaking team is progressing. And it was, honestly, it's something that will be ingrained with me for the rest of my life. I will never forget that discussion and having the opportunity to sit with him on that Friday before we passed away.
A wonderful, wonderful final memory. And thank you, Jenna, for sharing a very emotional recollection of an incredibly special man. We have a late cameo appearance, and I'm very glad to be able to bring him in because he's someone we've mentioned on the show, and he's someone who's very close to the other wine champion we raise a glass to today in Basie van Lill. Ibn Sadi's been dragged off his farming work for today to come and join us on the show. It's been wonderful to have you on, and thanks for squeezing us in. Much appreciated. We've heard a lot from Mark from Björn about the impact that Basie had, about a very simple and complicated man who just delivered such extraordinary grapes to so many great winemakers like yourself. Give us some of your memories of Basie and what for you made him such a special part of our wine family.
Dan, look, I think we lost the absolute treasure in a man. I mean, when I went to his funeral and I actually saw his wife, Rita, afterwards, she said, and I think it best summarized Basie, she said, niemand was kwaad vir Basie nie, en Basie was vir niemand kwaad nie. And what she means with that is, you know, he was never angry with anybody and nobody was ever angry with him. He was just incredible, composed human being, you know, and always level-headed, straight on the path, incredible insight. And I just think of a very, very modest man that just meant the world to so many of us that were picking his grapes and had the privilege to know him, you know. And yes, it'll leave a massive void, but you know, his son Christian at least was working with his father for a while. They have a great relationship, you know, and I hope that, you know, it's not that it makes it better, but I think the fact that Christian is carrying on with that legacy, just, you know, it's kind of, I think, Basie. And just as a testament to the man at his funeral, only one wish is bride lamb. There had to be bride lamb. That was it.
And I'm sure there was, and I'm sure it was paired with a fair number of celebratory glasses, some of which, no doubt, he was indirectly responsible for, given the grapes he produced. It seems quite a simple process here, when you plant some wine on some decent soil, and bang, you've got some grapes, and send them off to a winemaker to work the magic. It's a little more complicated than that. What was it to Basie's touch, Basie's magic, that allowed him to produce the kind of grapes that people like you and Mark and Chris Alheit were so happy to take and so delighted to be able to work with?
Yeah, no, you know, I mean, those vineyards were planted a long time ago, you know, with his father. So, you know, with all these old vineyards and great wines, it's multi-generational, it's legacy stuff. And, you know, he just stood there in the gap of that legacy. And it's some of the best pruned, best manicured, just these vines. Every vine mattered. Attention to detail. You know, he was incredibly dedicated to his vineyards and his family and his neighbors. You know, he's one neighbor, Joseph van Lill, that's actually the grower that's where Chris Alheit's got the Heilkrans vineyard. You know, for 30 years, him and his neighbor farmed over the fence together on both of their farms. You know, a huge friendship there. And yeah, I mean, but Christian, in a way, you know, you can tell people what to do, but lead by example. And Basie was that person just that was leading by example, and his son's going to carry on. Yes, and I'm a firm believer that legacy will just carry on and on. That's the beauty of it, you know. And yeah, the vineyard's still there, and yeah, at least, you know, with his departure, there'll be still something every year in the bottle that will be part of the man that's still alive.
And a lot of that will come from vines that are increasingly old. He's been a huge part of the Old Vine Project, working with people like Rosa and Andre. Give us a sense of that impact in curating and keeping and celebrating these old vines that are now such a recognized part of the South African wine treasury.
Yeah, no, look, the Old Vine, I think I've said it before, and I'll maintain it, that Rosa Kruger's discovery of that old Skurfberg Mountain area up there in the Citrusdal Mountains, for me was one of the greatest recent discoveries. And when I say recent, like in the last 25 years, and Basie van Lill stands centered to that, himself, Henk Land, that's also passed, and Joosha Visser. The three of them were kind of those three custodians that were, I always say it's very easy to love a vineyard when it's generating capital and when it's economically making sense. But it takes a different type of person to keep farming a vineyard with all the dedication when it's making a loss. And, as a testament to these guys, they were growing these vineyards through very, very hard times, very hard economic times. And, it's just this inherent pride of their vineyard and their farm and that neighborly thing. So, and in terms of the Old Vine Project, that Basie owns the most old vineyards of anyone up there. So, he stands very centered to all of those discoveries, and his vineyards, those vineyards are just impeccable. And we're all just very fortunate to have access to that fruit, to the family, and to their accommodating spirit to all of us. We're very many winemakers that go up there. But Arbeidsend, their farm is a very, very special farm, and it's a beautiful place to go. And in spirit, you'll always be there.
He leaves behind those vines, which will continue to be tended and continue to be used by winemakers like yourself and many others. But he also leaves behind these wonderful memories, as you have made clear. And it's Basie the person, above all, who we celebrate and remember today. Before we wrap up and get a final word from Mark, Eben, give us one or two of the fondest memories that you have of Basie van Lill.
Well, one of my fondest memories is the first time I took our youngest son up there, Zander. He was showing Zander to prune the vines, and he was bending over. My son was a tenth of his age, and he asked my son asked him, "Doesn't your back get hurt from pruning that low down?" And he says, "Well, there's one way of getting around it, is you must just get short children." So, that was one of my first trips there. Taking my sons up there, I made sure that they also met the man. And then, Basie, for me, it was always him, sitting with him in the kitchen, having a tea with him. And he was this big rooibos tea farmer, but yet he didn't really drink much rooibos tea. And the first time I asked for rooibos tea, he asked me if I was sick. So, that was old Basie. And there was always lamb chops around. Never saw the man without a lamb chop in the vicinity. So, we'll miss him. We'll miss the lamb chops, and we'll miss the conversations over rusks in his kitchen. Will be dearly missed.
Clearly, such an important influence on South African wine. Mark, a final word for you before we wrap up today's show, and memories of two wonderful men. The Basie van Lill, Chenin Blanc, Lill and Visser. Just give us a quick introduction to that wine and why that might be one worth raising a glass in the memory of this terrific man with.
Yeah, I love the way Eben said, we'll be able to celebrate the life of Basie through the wines we try and make, and from these incredible vineyards. And I think I just want to echo exactly what Eben said now. Probably my most fondest memories will be in the kitchen there with him and his wife, Rita and Christian, and just the genuine people that they were, the hospitality that you enjoyed. Doesn't matter if they've just met you or if they've known you for 10 years, they would be the warmest people you could ever meet, the friendliest people. It was the simplicity about it. It was just the real beauty and a privilege to have had the opportunity to get to know the van Lill family like that. So I think it's been a real honor and a privilege to try and make wines from him, and so I'll enjoy a glass of Chenin Blanc from that vineyard, and long may his memory live.
Wow, and it's got such not just fine winemakers, but great friends continuing his legacy. I think we will remember him fondly for many, many years to come. And here's your challenge then from Dan Really Likes Wine for this evening. Over the next week or two, whether it's a bottle of Eben Skirfberg, if you can smuggle one in from somewhere, or some Lill and Fusser, or possibly some of Chris Alheit's Shannon's. There are a number of different wines. Do a little bit of research, find a bottle and pour a glass, and do so alongside a glass of Durbanville Hills Sauvignon Blanc from Mr. Martin Moore, because we've got two memories today, two wonderful, wonderful characters of South African wine who made enormous contributions to a well-deserving of a gentle nod of thanks and appreciation for the contribution they make. And thanks and appreciation to all four of our guests today. So to Albert and Jenna, thank you very much for joining us from Durbanville Hills. Mark and Eben, much appreciated as well. To all four of you, thank you for sharing some very fond, very emotional memories of two great guys. And the fact that we've got those glasses of wine to keep toasting them with for years to come is a lovely way to remember them. So Albert, Jenna, Mark, Eben, guys, thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate the time on the show this evening.
Pleasure, Dan. Thank you.
Yes, Dan.
Yes.
So there we go. Remembering Martin Moore from Durbanville Hills, remembering Basie van Lill, the great viticulturist from the Swartland, the wines they inspired, the people they inspired, and the legacy they both leave behind. Before we give you a final memory of both men, just a reminder that you've got the chance, if you're in Johannesburg, to join us with another winemaking great, Kevin Arnold. He'll be at Norman Goodfellows Fourways with me Tuesday evening, and he'll be joining me for dinner at the Old Oak at Royal Johannesburg on Wednesday evening. Two very special nights out if you would like to come and join us. And on Thursday's show, your opportunity to talk about the art of the blend. Arlene, the wizard behind the Seriously Old Dirt, joins us on the show, and we'll be chatting to a couple of other very special guests indeed. That is on Thursday. Right now, we say a final goodbye from the show to Martin and to Basie, and remembering two people who together made massive contributions to South African wine. Goodbye.